Melissa had always believed that love could conquer anything, but as she lay in the hospital bed for the fourth time in 3 years, watching her husband Michael scroll through his phone instead of comforting her, she realized that some battles were meant to be fought alone. The miscarriage had been particularly brutal this time. She had carried the baby for 12 weeks, long enough to feel hope blooming in her chest, long enough to start planning nursery colors and baby names. "Maybe this is God's way of telling us something," Michael said without looking up from his phone, his voice carrying that familiar tone of irritation that had become his default whenever the topic of children arose. "Maybe you're just not meant to be a mother." The words hit Melissa like a physical blow. She turned her face toward the hospital wall, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. At 32, she had given everything to this marriage. Her career ambitions, her savings, her entire sense of self-worth. And now, as she lay there mourning the loss of another child, her husband was treating her like a defective appliance that needed to be replaced. "The doctor wants to run some tests," Melissa whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "On both of us. To see if there's something." "There's nothing wrong with me," Michael interrupted sharply. "I'm perfectly healthy." "This is your problem, Melissa. Don't try to drag me into your failures." What Melissa didn't tell him was that she had already been running tests secretly. For months, she had been visiting a fertility specialist in Victoria Island, paying for consultations and examinations with money she had saved from her teaching job. The results had been devastating in ways she couldn't have imagined. Her reproductive system was perfectly healthy. The miscarriages weren't caused by any medical condition. They were caused by genetic incompatibility. More specifically, they were caused by the fact that she had been artificially inseminating herself with donor sperm from a fertility clinic because the man she had married was completely infertile. The discovery had come about by accident. During one of her visits to the clinic, Dr. Adebayo had mentioned that her husband should also be tested to ensure optimal genetic compatibility. Melissa had brought in a sample of Michael's hair for DNA analysis, telling him it was for a health insurance requirement. When the results came back, Dr. Adebayo had called her into his office with a grave expression. "Mrs. Okafor," he had said gently, "I need to tell you something about your husband's fertility status. According to these tests, he has a severe genetic condition that makes it impossible for him to father children. His sperm count is essentially zero, and what little exists is completely non-viable." The revelation had shattered Melissa's world. Everything made sense now: why they had been trying for 5 years without success, why she had felt so guilty and desperate, why Michael had been so quick to blame her for their inability to conceive. He didn't know. He couldn't know, because admitting it would destroy his carefully constructed image of masculinity and dominance. So Melissa had made a decision that would haunt her for months to come. She would use donor sperm to get pregnant, and she would let Michael believe he was the father. It was the only way to save their marriage, to give him the child he claimed to want so desperately, and to stop the constant cycle of blame and shame that had poisoned their relationship. But the donor pregnancies kept ending in miscarriage, and each loss had driven Michael further away from her. He had become cruel, mocking her tears, dismissing her grief, and eventually, he had started staying out late, coming home smelling of another woman's perfume. "You know what your problem is?" Michael said as they left the hospital after her 4th miscarriage. "You're cursed. Maybe you did something in your past life, or maybe your family has bad blood. But whatever it is, you're bringing it into our marriage." Melissa stopped walking and stared at him. "How can you say that to me?" "I just lost our baby. Our baby." Michael laughed, a sound so cold and bitter that it made her stomach turn. "You can't even keep a baby alive for 3 months. How is that our baby?" "That's your failure, Melissa. Your broken body, your cursed womb. Don't blame me for what God has made clear." That night, Melissa made a decision that would change everything. She would leave. She would take her secret knowledge about his infertility and disappear, start over somewhere else, build a life that didn't revolve around a man who had forgotten how to love her. But first, she would do one thing that would ensure Michael learned the truth in the most humiliating way possible. 3 weeks later, Michael came home from work to find an empty house. Melissa's clothes were gone, her books were gone, even her toothbrush had been removed from the bathroom. On the kitchen table, he found a single envelope with his name written in her careful handwriting. Inside the envelope was a letter that began, "By the time you read this, I will be gone. There are things you need to know, things that will explain everything that has happened between us." But Michael didn't read the letter. He crumpled it up and threw it in the trash, convinced that Melissa was simply being dramatic, that she would come crawling back within a week begging for forgiveness. She didn't come back. Days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months, and Michael found himself surprisingly relieved. He had been seeing Chioma, a 24-year-old banker, for almost a year, and without Melissa's constant presence and her endless tears about babies, he could finally focus on building a relationship with a woman who understood him. Chioma was everything Melissa wasn't. Young, ambitious, glamorous, and most importantly, she got pregnant within 3 months of them becoming official. When she told him the news, Michael felt a surge of vindication so powerful it made him dizzy. "You see," he told his best friend Emeka over drinks at their favorite bar in Lekki, "I told you it was Melissa's problem. Look how quickly Chioma got pregnant. I'm virile, man. I'm fertile. Melissa was just defective." Emeka, who had been Michael's friend since university, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Maybe you shouldn't talk about Melissa like that. She went through a lot. She went through what she deserved." Michael interrupted. "Some women are just not meant to be mothers. Thank God I found that out before I wasted more time on her." What Michael didn't know was that Emeka had his own secret. He had been sleeping with Chioma for months before she started dating Michael, and the timeline of her pregnancy coincided perfectly with their last encounter. But Emeka had kept quiet because he was married, and because he assumed Chioma knew who the real father was. The baby was born 8 months later, a healthy boy whom Michael named David, after his own father. He was over the moon, posting pictures on social media, throwing an elaborate naming ceremony, and making sure everyone knew that he was finally a father. The child looked nothing like him, but Michael attributed that to the fact that babies often resemble their mothers initially. Meanwhile, Melissa had rebuilt her life in Abuja, where she had taken a job as a school administrator. She had met a gentle, kind man named Dr. Kimi Adebayo. Ironically, the cousin of the fertility specialist who had helped her understand her situation. Kimi was a pediatrician who had been married before and had lost his wife to cancer. He understood grief, he understood loss, and he understood the importance of honesty in a relationship. Melissa told him everything about the miscarriages, about Michael's infertility, about the donor sperm, about the cruelty she had endured. Kimi listened without judgment, held her when she cried, and eventually, he loved her back to wholeness. They married in a small ceremony 2 years after she left Lagos, and within 6 months, Melissa was pregnant. This time, with Kimi's support and love, she carried the babies to full term. She gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl, and for the first time in her adult life, she felt complete. The news of Melissa's successful pregnancy and marriage spread through their mutual friends in Lagos like wildfire. Michael heard about it at another bar night with Emeka, and his reaction was immediate and explosive. "That's impossible," he said, slamming his beer bottle on the table. "She can't have children. She's barren. She had 4 miscarriages with me 4. And now suddenly she has twins? It's impossible." Emeka, who had been carrying the weight of his secret for 3 years, finally couldn't take it anymore. "Michael, there's something I need to tell you." "What?" "About Chioma. About David. About everything." The conversation that followed destroyed Michael's world more completely than any natural disaster could have. Emeka confessed to his affair with Chioma, admitted that he was almost certainly David's biological father, and then delivered the final blow. He had run into Melissa's fertility doctor at a medical conference, and the doctor had inadvertently revealed the truth about Michael's infertility. "You're sterile, man," Emeka said, his voice breaking. "You've been sterile your whole life. Melissa knew. She was trying to protect you, to give you a child using donor sperm, but the pregnancies kept failing. She never told you because she knew it would destroy you." Michael sat in stunned silence for several minutes, his mind reeling as pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The miscarriages, Melissa's secretive behavior, her sudden disappearance, and now the revelation that she had successfully carried children with another man. "She knew," he whispered, She knew all along that I couldn't have children, and she didn't tell me. She was protecting you," Emeka insisted. "She loved you enough to. She made me believe I was the problem." Michael exploded. "She let me think she was defective, that she was cursed, that she was the reason we couldn't have children." But even as he said the words, Michael knew they weren't true. He remembered all the times he had mocked her, blamed her, called her cursed and broken. He remembered the cruelty in his voice when he told her she wasn't meant to be a mother. He remembered throwing away her letter without reading it. The paternity test results came back 2 weeks later, confirming what Emeka had already confessed. David was not Michael's son. Chioma, when confronted, broke down and admitted everything. She had been seeing both men, she had gotten pregnant by Emeka, and she had chosen Michael because he was more successful and could provide better for the child. The scandal destroyed Michael's reputation in their social circle. Friends who had congratulated him on his fatherhood now whispered about his infertility behind his back. Chioma left him, taking David with her to marry Emeka, who had divorced his wife to be with her. Michael was left alone in the house he had shared with Melissa, surrounded by reminders of all the cruelty he had inflicted on the woman who had loved him enough to protect his deepest secret. He found Melissa's letter in an old trash bag in the garage, still crumpled but readable. Through tears, he read her explanation of everything: the fertility tests, the donor sperm, the miscarriages, and most heartbreakingly, her love for him despite his treatment of her. "I know you will be angry when you learn the truth," she had written. "But I want you to know that I never blamed you for our infertility. I only wished I could have been stronger, that I could have found a way to give you the child you wanted. I hope someday you will forgive me for keeping this secret, and I hope you will find the happiness you deserve." Michael picked up his phone and dialed Melissa's number, which he had memorized but never called. It rang several times before she answered. "Hello, Melissa, it's me. It's Michael." There was a long pause. "What do you want, Michael?" "I know," he said simply. "I know everything. About me, about you, about what you tried to do. I know about the donor sperm, about my infertility, about everything." Another pause. "I see. I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry for everything I said to you, everything I did to you. You were trying to protect me, and I was so cruel." "Michael," Melissa interrupted gently. "I forgave you a long time ago. I had to, for my own peace. But I don't deserve forgiveness. I called you cursed. I blamed you for everything. I laughed at your pain." "Yes, you did," Melissa said calmly. "And now you know how that pain feels. Now you know what it's like to have your world shattered by someone else's choices." Michael could hear children laughing in the background, and the sound was like a knife to his heart. "Are you happy?" he asked. "I am," Melissa said. "I have a husband who loves me, children who bring me joy, and a life that I build on truth instead of lies. I'm finally happy." "I'm glad," Michael said, and he meant it. "I'm glad you found what you were looking for." "What about you, Michael? What are you looking for now?" Michael looked around his empty house, at the pictures of a child who wasn't his, at the remnants of relationships built on deception and cruelty. "I don't know," he admitted. "I honestly don't know." "Maybe," Melissa said softly, "you should start by learning to be honest with yourself. And maybe, if you're very lucky, you'll find someone who can love you despite your flaws, the way I tried to love you despite mine." The line went quiet except for the sound of children playing in the background. Finally, Michael spoke again. "I hope your children know how lucky they are to have you as their mother." "They will," Melissa said. "I'll make sure they do." After she hung up, Michael sat in his empty house and wept for the first time since he was a child. He wept for the marriage he had destroyed, for the woman he had broken, for the children he would never have, and for the man he had become. But most of all, he wept for the realization that sometimes the greatest tragedy is not what happens to us, but what we do to others when we're too proud to face the truth about ourselves. Years later, when people asked Melissa about her first marriage, she would smile sadly and say that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the truth, even if they're not ready to receive it. And sometimes, the greatest gift you can give yourself is the courage to walk away from someone who can't love you the way you deserve to be loved. The woman who had once been mocked for her miscarriages had learned to laugh again. Not with cruelty, but with the joy of a mother who had finally found her way home.